You ever see something that just doesn't belong? A man built a mountain rock in silence, standing in a town full of soft men and loud promises. That was Silas Monroe, and the town was Prosperity Creek. He rode in on an autumn morning, the kind that feels like a clean break from the past. The Montana air was sharp, and the mountains were on fire with gold and crimson leaves. He had enough prime furs on his pack horse to make a rich man jealous, and a silence around him so deep it was like a wall. For 15 years, he'd lived up in the high country. They called him Grizzly Monroe, a hermit, a ghost. He'd show up twice a year, trade his furs, and vanish back into the pines. No one knew he carried a leather journal filled with sketches of eagles and words that were as gentle as his hands were rough. No one knew the mountain man had the heart of a poet. They just saw the size of him, the beard threaded with silver, and the quiet confidence of a man who'd made peace with being alone. But in a town built on greed, peace is just a commodity waiting to be sold. At the far end of town stood a brick mansion, a monument to money. It belonged to Ezra Whitmore, a man who owned the mines, the bank, and half the souls in Prosperity Creek. Ezra had 3 daughters. 2 were golden-haired beauties, married off to rich and powerful men. And then there was Lydia. The town called her the plain one, the spinster. At 26, she was too tall, her face marked by faint scars from a childhood sickness. She had her father's intelligence, but none of her sister's beauty. So she was overlooked, ignored, a piece of furniture in her own family's home. But Lydia Whitmore saw things other people missed. And from her kitchen window, she saw the mountain man. She saw the quiet dignity in the way he moved. She saw a strength that had nothing to do with muscle. And when Silas Monroe happened to glance up at the rich man's house, his eyes met hers across the dusty street. It was just for a second. But in that 1 second, a fuse was lit. A fuse that would connect the lonely mountain man and the forgotten daughter and burn Ezra Whitmore's whole world to the ground. Because Ezra had seen the mountain man too. And he wasn't looking at the man. He was looking at the land the man owned and the secrets buried underneath it. Ezra Whitmore was a man drowning in debt. From the outside, he was the king of Prosperity Creek. But behind the mansion walls, his empire was crumbling. The mines were failing. A railroad deal had gone sour, and creditors from back east were circling like vultures. He needed a miracle, or a victim. And when he looked at Silas Monroe, he saw a solution so perfect, so cruel, it could only be the work of the devil himself. He did his research. He learned that Silas Monroe wasn't just a trapper. He owned hundreds of acres of prime mountain land. Land that, according to certain secret geological surveys, was sitting on top of one of the richest gold veins in the territory. Silas didn't even know it. He was a rich man who thought he was poor. Ezra's plan was simple, and it was monstrous. He would use his daughter, the one nobody wanted. He would offer Lydia in marriage to the lonely mountain man, a business deal, a wife in exchange for access. He drew up a contract full of legal traps and hidden clauses. It would give the Whitmore family advisory rights over any mineral claims. It would make Silas part of the family and his assets part of the family's holdings. And if Silas proved difficult to control, well, the mountains were a dangerous place. Men disappeared up there all the time. He just had to convince his daughter to be the bait in his trap. He called Lydia to his study, a room that smelled of old leather and new lies. "I've arranged a marriage for you," he said, his voice flat, "to Mr. Monroe." Lydia stood there, her hands folded, her face a mask of calm. She had learned long ago not to show her father any emotion. It was like showing a predator a wound. "I see," was all she said. "He's agreed, of course," Ezra lied. "It's a fine match for a man like him." Lydia's eyes moved to the contract on his desk. She was a brilliant woman. She'd been managing his household accounts for years. She knew the language of deception better than anyone. "What have you promised him, father?" she asked, her voice quiet but sharp. "And what have you promised yourself?" The question hit him. For a second he saw her not as his plain, dutiful daughter, but as a stranger, an intelligent, dangerous stranger. "It's none of your concern," he snapped. "Your job is to be a wife." Lydia didn't argue. She just stood up, her dignity a shield he couldn't penetrate. "Very well," she said. "If Mr. Monroe truly wishes to marry me, knowing I am a plain woman with no dowry, Then I accept. She paused at the door. But I have a condition. I will not enter a marriage built on deception. I will know the truth of your agreements. She walked out, leaving him alone with his ugly plan in the first prickle of doubt. He had underestimated her. Badly. Meanwhile, in a sparse room at the Frontier Hotel, Silas McGraw was staring at his own copy of the contract. And he was not bewildered. He was furious. The legal traps were so obvious, so clumsy, it was an insult. Ezra Whitmore thought he was a fool, an uneducated mountain man who could be tricked into signing his life away. He almost tore the contract to pieces. He almost saddled his horse and rode back to the silence of his mountains. But then he thought of the woman, Lydia. He had seen her in town on his visits. He had seen her kindness to the town's children, the quiet way she carried herself. He had seen the sadness in her eyes. He knew she was another victim in her father's scheme. And Silas McGraw had a secret buried even deeper than the gold under his land, the quiet poet, the lonely hermit. He had once been a captain in the United States Army, a graduate of West Point, a decorated officer in military intelligence. He had come to the mountains to escape the lies and schemes of men, and now they had followed him to his door. He made a decision. He would not run. He would not confront Ezra. He would go and speak to the bait herself. The knock on the mansion door sent a shockwave through the Whitmore family's dinner. Silas stood on the porch, his hat in his hand. He'd put on his best clothes, a clean shirt, a dark wool jacket. He looked less like a mountain man and more like a visiting judge. Lydia met him in the hallway. She wore a simple dress of deep blue that brought out the fire in her brown hair. For the first time, Silas saw that she wasn't plain at all. She was just quiet, like a forest pool that runs deeper than you think. "Mr. McGraw," she said, her voice steady, "this is a surprise." "I was hoping we could talk," he said, "about your father's business proposal." They walked in the garden, under a sky full of cold, distant stars. The air smelled of roses and damp earth. "I don't think either of us is a fool, Miss Whitmore," Silas began, his voice a low rumble. "We both know what this is." "Yes," she said, "we do." "Then the question is," he said, turning to face her, "are you a willing partner in this scheme, or just another pawn?" Lydia looked away, toward the dark, jagged peaks of the mountains. "At 26, Mr. McGraw, my options are limited. My father sees me as a burden. My sisters see me as a charity case. I am a plain woman in a world that values beauty above all else." She turned back to him, and her eyes were fierce in the moonlight. "You asked for honesty. Here it is. I am willing to do this because a life with a stranger in the mountains is better than a slow death of irrelevance in my father's house." Her brutal honesty stunned him. "You are not plain, Miss Whitmore," he said, and he meant it. "You are the first honest person I have spoken to in this town. That is a rare and beautiful thing." For the first time she smiled. A real smile. It transformed her face. It was like watching the sun rise. "Why haven't you just left?" she asked. "You know my father means to cheat you." "Because I'm tired of being alone," he admitted, the words feeling strange and true. "And because when your father made his offer, I thought maybe we could build something real out of his lies. A partnership, based on honesty and respect. The very things he's trying to avoid." The proposition hung in the air between them. Not a marriage of convenience, but an alliance of survivors. "If we did this," Lydia said, her voice barely a whisper, "it would be on our terms, not his." "Our terms," Silas agreed. The wedding was a strange, quiet affair. The town came to watch, expecting a funeral. Instead, they saw two people who looked not like victims, but like partners sealing a deal. When Silas placed a simple gold band on Lydia's finger, she met his gaze, and they shared a look that no one else in the room could understand. It was a look of conspiracy, a look of shared secrets, a look that said, "The game is on." As they rode out of town in a sturdy wagon, leaving the gasping gossips and a very confused Ezra Whitmore behind, Lydia felt a thrill of fear and excitement. She had spent her entire life following the rules. Now she was riding into the wilderness with a man she barely knew, a man who was her husband, her partner, and her co-conspirator in a war against her own father. The journey to the cabin was a revelation. Lydia, the sheltered town girl, proved to be a natural in the wild. She knew the name of every plant, which ones could heal and which could harm. She read the land like a book. Silas, in turn, found himself talking more than he had in 15 years, sharing the secrets of his mountain home. His cabin wasn't a hermit's hovel. It was a fortress, solid, well-built, with a library of books that would rival her father's. This was the home of a man of substance, a man of secrets. That night, as they prepared their first meal, he gave her a small, hand-carved comb, a simple gift, a gesture of respect. "Welcome home, Lydia," he said, and for the first time in her life, she felt like she was. But as she was unpacking her few belongings, her hand brushed against a loose floorboard in her new bedroom. Curiosity got the better of her. She pried it up. Underneath was a small, locked metal box. She worked the lock with a hairpin. Inside there wasn't gold or money. It was a military service record for Captain Silas McGraw, decorated for heroism in military intelligence. And underneath it was a wanted poster. Old, creased, but the face was unmistakable, even with the cruel scar running down his cheek. It wasn't Silas. It was another man. A man wanted for war crimes, for the murder of unarmed prisoners. Her husband wasn't just a soldier. He wasn't just a hermit. He was a hunter. And as she stared at the face on that poster, she had a terrible, chilling thought. Was this why he'd really come to the mountains? Was he running from something? Or was he waiting for someone? The discovery of the wanted poster changed the air in the cabin. The easy peace of their first days was replaced by a humming tension. Lydia said nothing about what she'd found. She put the box back, replaced the floorboard, and pretended she knew nothing. But now she watched Silas with new eyes. Every time he cleaned his rifle, every time he stared out at the distant peaks, she wondered, was he just a man enjoying his solitude, or was he a man on watch? She was a partner in a business deal. She was a wife in a marriage of convenience. But was she also sleeping in the same house as a man on the run from a killer? The answer came 3 weeks later, carried on the back of a sweating horse. A messenger from town brought a letter, addressed to her, from a law firm in Denver. Her father's business was a house of cards. His creditors were closing in. The letter was a formal inquiry, asking about her marriage. They were investigating Ezra for hiding assets. They were suggesting her marriage was a fraud. That was the first blow. The second was tucked inside the first. A copy of the marriage contract, her father's copy. And in the margins, in his spidery handwriting, were his real notes, his real plan. He hadn't just been trying to get access to Silas's land. The contract was designed to make Silas legally responsible for all of Ezra's debts. He wasn't just marrying her off. He was selling her husband into financial ruin. "He used me," she whispered, the full scope of her father's betrayal finally clear. "He used both of us." She showed Silas the letter. He read it, his face a mask of cold fury. "I knew nothing of this," she said, her voice shaking. "Silas, you have to believe me." He looked at her and his steady gaze held nothing but trust. "I know that, Lydia," he said. "Anyone who has spent 5 minutes with you would know that." Then he took her hand. "Whatever your father's plan was, it doesn't matter. What we have built here, this is real, and I won't let him destroy it." The declaration, spoken with such simple sincerity, broke through her fear. This man, this stranger, trusted her more than her own family ever had. "I choose you, Silas," she said, her voice fierce. "Not because I have to, because I want to." He pulled her close, and in the warm, safe circle of his arms, she finally felt the last of the old Lydia, the timid, overlooked spinster, fall away for good. But just as they were trying to figure out their next move, Silas found something else. Another paper, mixed in with the contracts from her father. It was the geological survey, the proof of the gold. "This is what he's really after," Lydia breathed. "This is why he's so desperate." "We need to hide this," Silas said. "If anyone knows we have this, they won't just send lawyers. They'll send killers." That night, everything changed. The last barriers between them fell away. They were no longer partners in an arrangement. They were a man and a woman, in love, united against a world that wanted to tear them apart. The first snows of winter came, sealing them in their mountain fortress. It was a time of peace, of planning. Lydia used her sharp mind to map their land, to plan their defenses. Silas, the former military captain, taught her to shoot, to track, to survive. They were becoming a formidable team. And in the long, dark evenings, he finally told her the story of the wanted poster. The man with the scar, his name was Corbin. He had been Silas's commanding officer during the war, a man who had committed unspeakable atrocities and framed his own men for them. Silas had been the only one to escape. He hadn't been hiding in the mountains. He had been waiting for the day Corbin would get careless. "I thought the war was over," Silas said, his voice heavy. "But I guess some wars never end." "Then we will fight this one together," Lydia replied, her hand finding his. The winter was their training ground, and when the spring thaw came, they were ready. The first sign of trouble was a group of armed men, led by her father. He came with a new story, a new lie. He had legal papers claiming Silas's homestead was invalid, that the land was never really his, but he had underestimated his opponents. "My name," Silas said, his voice ringing with an authority Ezra had never heard, "is Captain Silas McGraw, United States Army, retired." He produced his own papers, legal documents from the Territorial Supreme Court, confirming his claim. He had spent the winter pulling strings, using old contacts, preparing for this very moment. Ezra and his hired guns retreated, humiliated and furious. But it wasn't over. "He'll be back," Lydia said, watching them go. "And he won't bring lawyers next time." She was right. Through her own network of friends, she learned the truth. Her father was not just in debt. He had promised the gold on their land to multiple investors, dangerous men who did not tolerate failure. Her father wasn't just greedy anymore. He was desperate. And a desperate man is the most dangerous animal of all. They saw the watchers in the hills. They found tracks near their perimeter. They were being studied, analyzed. A professional military operation was being planned against them. "He's hired my old regiment," Silas said one evening, his face grim as he studied the tracks through his field glasses. "Men I trained. Men who know how I think." "Then we have to think differently," Lydia replied. She spread her maps across the table. "They expect a fortress defense. They expect us to wait here for them. But what if we don't? What if we take the fight to them?" The attack came at dawn. A dozen professional soldiers, moving with deadly efficiency. But Silas and Lydia weren't in the cabin. They had anticipated the assault. They had spent the last week setting a series of traps and ambushes all over the mountain. The battle wasn't for a cabin. It was for the entire territory. What followed was a masterclass in guerrilla warfare. Using Lydia's maps and Silas's military genius, they led the attackers on a deadly chase through the mountains. An explosive charge triggered a landslide, blocking the main trail. A hidden deadfall trap took out 2 men. Lydia, a deadly sharpshooter now, pinned them down from a high ridge while Silas flanked them from below. They weren't just defending, they were hunting. The professional soldiers, who had expected an easy fight, found themselves in a nightmare. They were being picked off one by a ghost and a woman who seemed to be everywhere at once. The battle culminated in a final, desperate assault on the cabin. But it was a trap. The remaining 8 soldiers charged across the open ground, right into a perfectly planned crossfire. In the midst of the chaos, Lydia saw the enemy commander draw a bead on Silas. Without thinking, she fired. Her bullet saved his life. An attacker reached the back of the cabin, but she met him not with a gun, but with a cast iron skillet, a brutal, effective weapon. The fight was almost over. The remaining attackers were regrouping behind the woodshed, and Lydia saw her chance. One of their prepared charges was still unused, right under the enemy's position. "Lydia, no!" Silas screamed as she broke cover, sprinting across the open ground. Bullets kicked up dust at her feet. She reached the detonation point and threw the switch. The explosion was deafening. The woodshed vanished. The battle was over. The enemy commander, the only one left, surrendered. "Whitmore didn't tell us we'd be facing soldiers," he said, his voice full of weary respect. They had won. But their victory was short-lived. From the woods, a single rider emerged. He wasn't one of the attackers. He was tall, dressed in black, with a long, jagged scar running down his face. Corbin. He had been watching the whole time. He had let his hired men get slaughtered just to see what Silas could do. "Impressive, Captain," Corbin said, a cruel smile on his face. "Very impressive. You haven't lost your touch." He held up a leather satchel. "I believe your father-in-law was looking for this." He tossed the satchel to the ground. It fell open. It wasn't full of money or papers. It was full of dynamite, and the fuses were already lit. "It seems Ezra made a deal with a new partner," Corbin sneered. "Me. He promised me half the gold in exchange for getting rid of you, but I think I'll just take it all." He wheeled his horse around. "Goodbye, Captain." The fuses were burning fast. The entire cabin, the entire clearing, was about to be blown to smithereens. There was no time to run. This was it. The end. But Lydia wasn't looking at the dynamite. She was looking at Corbin's saddlebags. There was a familiar shape under the leather. A book. A journal. Her journal. The one where she'd mapped the entire mountain. The one that showed the location of every cave. Every hidden passage. Corbin had her maps. He knew their escape routes. In a split second, she understood. The battle wasn't a failure for him. It was a test. He was just seeing what they were capable of. He was learning their tactics. The real war hadn't even started. "The river!" Silas roared, grabbing her arm. He pulled her toward the cliff edge behind the cabin. It was a 50-foot drop to the raging mountain river below. It was certain death, but the dynamite was more certain. "Together!" she yelled. They leaped, hand in hand, just as the world erupted in fire and thunder. They hit the icy water with a bone-jarring impact. The current seized them, dragging them under, tossing them like rag dolls. They were pulled down into the churning darkness, the roar of the explosion replaced by the roar of the river. But they held on. They held on to each other. They surfaced half a mile downstream, bruised, battered, half drowned, but alive. They dragged themselves onto the riverbank, collapsing in the mud. Their home was gone. Their land was a smoking crater. They had nothing left, except each other, and a war to win. 6 months later, the town of Prosperity Creek was a different place. The Whitmore mansion was boarded up, its owner a fugitive from the law. The mines were under new, honest management. And the story of the mountain man and his plain wife was a local legend. After the explosion, everyone thought they were dead. Corbin, thinking he had won, had moved to take over the gold claim, but he had underestimated them. Using Lydia's knowledge of the hidden caves and Silas's military training, they became ghosts. They waged a silent, brilliant war against Corbin's operation. They sabotaged his equipment. They spooked his pack animals. They used their knowledge of the land to turn the mountain itself into a weapon. The final confrontation happened not with guns, but with wits. They lured Corbin into an old abandoned mine shaft, the very one where he had murdered Silas's men years ago, and they trapped him there. Not with dynamite, but with a simple, clever landslide. They didn't kill him. They buried him alive, leaving him for the federal marshals they had anonymously summoned. Ezra Whitmore was eventually found in Mexico, a broken, penniless man. He died in a prison hospital, his name a curse in the town he had once ruled. And Silas and Lydia? They rebuilt. They used the gold from their land not to build a mansion, but to build a community. They founded a school, a hospital. They brought a new kind of prosperity to the creek, one built on honesty and hard work, not greed and lies. They never had children of their own, but they had a whole town full of them. Their love story wasn't a fairy tale of passion and romance. It was something stronger, something real. It was a partnership, forged in fire, built on a foundation of mutual respect. They proved that true beauty isn't about a flawless face, it's about a courageous heart. And they proved that sometimes the greatest treasures are not the ones you dig from the ground, but the ones you find in the most unexpected people. If you believe that real love is about more than what you see on the surface, and that true strength is found in partnership, do me a favor, hit that like button and make sure you're subscribed, because the world is full of people who are overlooked, and sometimes they're the ones with the most incredible stories to tell. Thanks for listening.